Welcome to today's Explainer. We are jumping right into a historical and textual narrative today that honestly reads almost like a classic storybook journey, but one that carries just immense cultural and theological weight. Picture this, if you will. You've got this dazzling, glorious mountaintop experience, and then it descends rapidly into a chaotic, messy valley. And right at the center of it all is a resolute hero who begins a long, incredibly difficult walk toward a fixed destination, Jerusalem. We're talking about a story of stark contrasts and some really heavy realities. So let's get right into it. Okay, let's dive into this. Notice the stark contrast we're looking at here. On one hand, you've got the mountaintop, a place of glory, splendor, divine voices, the whole shebang. But then right alongside it, you have the valley. And the valley is waiting with a chaotic crowd, a desperate father, and a deeply suffering boy. This contrast literally couldn't be sharper. The movement from the top of the mountain down to the valley establishes this recurring rhythm in the narrative. And honestly, it's the rhythm of the life of faith in general, right? You can't just stay up on the mountain forever. There is real, messy, desperate human need waiting at the bottom. Which brings us to our first section, down into the valley, where we meet a desperate father and a tormented boy. Emerging right out of the chaos, this father begs for his only child, who suffers from these violent convulsions, as an absolute last hope. He laments, "I begged your disciples to drive it out, but they could not." Think about how striking that development is. These are the exact same disciples who had just recently been given the power and authority to do this very thing. But here, they fail completely. Jesus actually responds with a rare moment of open exasperation, lamenting an unbelieving generation. But then he steps in. He rebukes the spirit, heals the boy, and tenderly gives him back to his father. It's such a beautiful detail because the restoration isn't just physical, it's relational. It perfectly mirrors the relational restorations we've seen earlier in the source text. Let's transition over to the next chapter, the disciples' confusion, full of marveling and misunderstanding. So after this incredible healing, the crowd is euphoric, right? They are marveling at the greatness of God, but Jesus does something completely unexpected. He deliberately punctures this celebratory mood. He breaks the tension by introducing this Greek term paradidomi, which literally means delivered or handed over. He tells them point blank that he is going to be handed over into the hands of men. It's a hugely important term that sets up the impending passion narrative. But, and this is fascinating, the source material notes that a veil covered the disciples' understanding. They are left entirely in the dark, just totally unable to process the idea of a betrayed, suffering leader. So here is the question we really have to ask ourselves. Did the disciples finally understand Jesus' prediction about suffering? I mean, how do you think these close followers are going to react to such heavy, sobering news? Take just a second to ponder that, because when we turn the page to see their actual response, it's genuinely startling. And that brings us to a lesson in greatness, exploring this upside-down kingdom. And this brilliantly illustrates how Jesus handles the situation, because the jarring irony here is almost unbelievable. Literally immediately after Jesus predicts his own humiliation and death, his sidekicks start arguing over which one of them is the greatest. They are jockeying for status in an upside-down kingdom that they clearly do not yet understand. Jesus handles their status dispute with a living object lesson, telling them, "Whoever welcomes this little child in my name welcomes me, for it is the least among you who is the greatest." But placing a child right beside him, and remember, a child was a person with absolutely zero social standing or power in the ancient world, he completely inverts their hierarchy. The path to true greatness runs downward into humble service, not upward into power. This brings us to a massive turning point. The road to Jerusalem, a truly resolute hinge in the story. We are shifting away from the Galilean wandering. From this moment forward, the story has a fixed, unshakable destination. So the absolutely crucial point is right here in this phrase. He resolutely set his face to go to Jerusalem. This phrase evokes profound determination and a fixed, unwavering purpose. It proves that Jesus is not just some tragic victim being swept along by historical forces way beyond his control. No, he's making a deliberate choice. He is walking purposefully toward the cross in direct obedience to a larger plan. Let's break down the sequence of events and track this recurring motif we've been seeing. Look at the situation we start with. Jesus sends messengers ahead, but a Samaritan village rejects him simply because he's heading to Jerusalem. Now look at the disciples' reaction. James and John literally want to call down fire from heaven to destroy the entire village. It's wild. They are operating purely out of territorialism and vengeance. They basically want to act like the prophet Elijah. But notice Jesus' correction. He rebukes them. He quietly moves to another village. He consistently models a path of complete non-retaliation and peace. Moving into the final stretch of today's explainer, the cost of following and these intense encounters on the road. As this long road trip begins, 3 would-be followers step up to volunteer, but each one receives a pretty sobering reality check about what this path actually requires. The first man says he'll follow Jesus anywhere, but Jesus replies, "Foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head." He's basically saying, look, enthusiastic discipleship requires embracing absolute insecurity. Following him means homelessness. It means the loss of ordinary everyday comforts. Enthusiasm alone just isn't going to cut it. It requires real, physical sacrifice. Then, the second follower asked to go and bury his father first. Now, in Jewish culture, this was one of the most sacred, binding duties a person could possibly have. Yet Jesus' response is, let the dead bury their own dead, but you go and proclaim the kingdom of God. The cultural weight of this statement is absolutely shocking. Jesus is showing that the kingdom takes absolute, overriding priority over literally everything, even the most sacred of family obligations. When the kingdom calls, there can be no indefinite delays. So we're seeing a really clear progression of commitment here. Step 1 is embracing homelessness and absolute insecurity. Step 2 is putting the kingdom first, even overriding those sacred cultural duties. And step 3, no looking back. This third step comes into play when another follower simply wants to go back and say goodbye to his family. It seems like a modest, totally reasonable request, right? But Jesus uses it to demand an undivided, absolute commitment for this journey. Now, what's really interesting about this is the vivid agricultural metaphor Jesus uses to answer that third follower. No one who puts a hand to the plow and looks back is fit for service in the kingdom of God. Think about it. If a farmer is plowing a field and he's constantly looking back over his shoulder, he's going to cut a crooked furrow. He gets distracted. Discipleship requires that exact same relentless forward focus. You just cannot be continually looking back to the old life or entertaining any divided loyalties. Let's take a step back and just summarize what we've seen from the disciples throughout this entire sequence. Just look at this track record. When faced with a tormented boy, they failed to cast out the demon. When Jesus predicted his own betrayal, they argued about greatness. When an outsider was casting out demons, they tried to stop him. And when a Samaritan village rejected them, they wanted to call down fire. The disciples consistently, almost completely misunderstand the mission. The path of the cross is just completely counterintuitive to their natural human instincts for power, status, and control. So what does this all mean? Which brings us to our final thought for this explainer. If the road demands this much absolute commitment, and the closest followers understand so little of what's actually happening, how is this journey to Jerusalem going to end? The cross is no longer just a distant shadow, guys. It is a fixed, unavoidable destination. Every single step they take now move directly toward it. The tension is incredibly high, and it leaves us wondering what could possibly happen next on this unforgiving road. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive, and keep that question in the back of your mind as you continue exploring this remarkable historical narrative.